So welcome to everyone, and we're actually having this session on harnessing Python and AWS Lambda for data scraping. Now, not just data scraping, but primarily in terms of web scraping. Now, as we go along, we would actually get to see data scraping and then web scraping in context. But for now, we'll just have that as data scraping. All right, great. Now, who am I? So my name is Emmanuel Mingo, and I'm a cloud consultant, and I'm an authorized instructor with AWS. Also, I'm the lead trainer with Ghana Code Club, which actually focuses on STEM education. So STEM education for young ones, and coding, robotics, I mean, that whole lot of that. And I'm actually currently a graduate student with the University of East London, where I'm actually doing my digital forensics, a master's in digital forensics and then information security. Now, I'm a tech educator at heart. That's to do with STEM, so science, technology, English, and mathematics. Those are things that I like to indulge myself in. And I could say from as far back as 2015, 2016, I've been doing some bit of that every now and then, like specifically in terms of technology. All right. Now, with the picture here, you can see the science, technology, engineering, and then mathematics to just capture what I mean by being a tech educator or a STEM educator at heart. And these are a few certifications that I have. Actually, I'm actually looking to build more on these as I go along to learn. All right. Great. So that's just about me, and we'll just probably go ahead. I'll probably turn off my camera now, and then we can go ahead with the session. All right. Great. So this is what we are looking at. So on the left side, we have Python. Okay, so this is actually in reference to Python. And here, let me just set the pointer here. That would help. Okay, yes. So here we have the Python, okay, and then here we have Lambda, okay. So those are the main things I would actually be looking at. Now, before I go here, yeah. So just one thing to take note of, okay. This session is for educational purposes, okay. Now, when I say educational purposes, it's to just give you a fair idea of what is involved in data scraping, okay. Now, in the real world, or when you actually wanted to gather some data, okay, anywhere you find yourself, the key things you should note is that you need to seek permission, okay, when necessary, especially when you are dealing with large volumes of data. So if you are scraping the entire content of a website, you definitely need to seek permission, okay? So let's say for a competitor or something, you have to seek permission before doing that. And ideally, you don't scrape large volumes of data. Let's say some specific information that you want to use on a project. These are some bit of the information that you'd actually go ahead to scrape, okay, on the internet. All right. Now, that's just that. Let me do this. So I have a couple of resources that I wanted to share with you guys. And let me go ahead and then share that here. This is... let me see. All right. I hope you can all see that. See here. All right. So let me just walk through these resources because I feel they'll be important as we go along. So you can see here, I have requirements and then I have resources. Okay, so requirements and then resources. Now, with requirements, what we are going to do today, we're going to be dealing some aspects with HTML. Okay. And then we'll also look at not necessarily CSS, but HTML, okay, and then some concepts from JavaScript when you are selecting some specific HTML elements. And then we'll also look at some bits of Python, okay, and then we'll look at some bit to do with AWS. The main focus of this session is actually the AWS side of things, but we'll just take it slow, and then we'll go from there as and when. Okay, so don't worry so much about that. I want us to learn as much as we can during the session. All right. Now, so with the very first one, okay, so we have the HTML structure. Okay, so in terms of HTML, Now you can look at this website, which is the W3 schools. Okay, they have very great resources there, and you can look at their CSS components as well, and then their JavaScript. Okay, so in terms of JavaScript, they have some resources as well, which would actually be looking at. And for Python, right? Yeah, so you can, there's this book. Okay, let me just share that here. There's this book, Python Crash Course. There's actually a third edition of that, but it's a very good book if you are actually wanting to start off on your Python journey. This is a book that you could actually look at. So if you look here, you notice that you have it about 289 CDs. Okay, so if you want to get that, you could just see, and then you get that for yourself. Okay, so it's very good. It has like great resources as well. And I mean, anyone starting in Python, this is one of the books I recommend for them. Now, in addition to that, I actually saw a resource. So while I was preparing for this particular session, I saw a resource from Google Developers Group. And that resource actually also highlights when you are starting off with Python. And it's actually a free resource. So you could actually go ahead and then look at that as well. Okay, yes. All right. So that's that for the Python. Okay, so you can look at the developers.google.com. That's here. Okay, and then you can review that as well. And then we have AWS fundamentals. Okay, now if you look at the sessions that we have for today, okay, or this week, there are quite a number of sessions, a few sessions that are highlighting AWS. So you could actually join us. I think the previous one, there was just one running from 9 to 10. I think it might still be running, but you could check these resources as and when they come out. Okay. Now, let me come here. So, this is the African Digital Skills website, and these are where you can actually view the resources from the past sessions. Okay, so there are quite a number of them. So if I come here and then I type AWS, you notice that there are some number of resources there. So we have one here, Introduction to Cloud DevOps, and then AWS. I think Chandra took that. And then I had a couple of sessions in the past also, which were actually also in relation to hosting website. This was last 2 years. Okay, so you could actually check those out. And I mean, there are some number of resources there. So some things to do with Python as well. You could check that. So the resources are available for anyone who is interested, and then you could check that out also. Aside that, I had a Facebook link. I don't remember what exactly I put there, but you could also check those out. Okay, so these are some of the requirements. Okay, now I say them as requirements because it gives you a further appreciation of what we are going to be talking about over the period. Okay, so that's just one thing. But if you do not have that form of a background, it doesn't really matter. You could still go ahead and then pick a couple of things as we go along. Okay, so the good thing I like about these sessions is that they're actually recorded. So as far as they are being recorded, it means that you can actually get access to them at a later time. Okay, so you could just review that later on, and then you see how you go from there. So these are some additional resources that I have. So yeah, so first one is actually my blog, my Medium blog, and I share on cloud and then security. So anything cloud, primarily AWS. Okay, I share on those ones. And yeah, with the code samples that we'll be using, let me see if I have that here. So on GitHub, okay, we have some code resources that we'll be using. Okay, so you could just check that out. I will be updating the README in particular because I have to put some changes in there. Okay, so the README file, that gives you some bit of understanding as to what exactly this particular repository is about. Okay, so I'll update that as and when we go along, probably later after the session. Okay, but these are the code aspects that we'll be looking at, or the code aspects that we'll be working from within this session. Okay, that's where we do the demo. Okay, we'll do some bit of talking before we get to the demo, at least give us we have using I look at the document, articles on data script, some articles on Python. And then last year, I had a session actually on Python as well, but that was based off another module. Okay, so you could check that out. And yeah, Chandra's session is also here. And then there's this video, which I shared when you are working with AWS Lambda. We'll not dive so much into that, but I mean, if you want to go ahead and then look at that, that's fine. And then there's this site here. Let me just open that, and then I believe it will be of interest to all of us here. Yeah, so Real Python. So with realpython.com, what you get is that you actually get a lot of tutorials. Okay, so they have different tutorials, very interesting tutorials that you could actually build on and then also add to your website, whichever one that you are, let's say your portfolio. Okay, so you could actually have that. So they have these tutorials. Some of them are in video form, some of them are in text form, and then you can work with that. So working with databases, Jupyter, Python, let's say adding ChatGPT with that. I saw a session on this, and this is very, very interesting, like incorporating ChatGPT with Python and then asking, like making those prompts, and then you get the feedback from that. So you could actually do it in your test, and that's possible. And then there are other things in there. So there's actually something you could also look. These are the how do you call it? The resources and then the requirements. So I'll just go ahead now. I'll share the link in the chat, okay, so that you could actually go ahead and then review that also. So let me just put that in the chat here. All right. Yes, so that's in the chat. So you can just save it somewhere, and then you can review that at a later time. Okay. So with that said, I think we can get back to our slides. Okay, so we are done with the resource walkthrough, and so we could just go ahead with that as well. All right, so we want to start with the introduction. And for those of us who are here, I mean, if you can hear me, please just put a 1 or 2 in the chat so that I know that you are here. So you can put a 1 or a 2 in the chat. I want to see if we are all here, those of us who have actually joined the session here. So the chat is actually open. So just go ahead and then put a 1 or a 2 in the chat. Now, yeah, okay, I see some responses in there. That's good. All right, that means I'm not alone. That's good. All right, so a few housekeeping rules. Okay, so I'll be going along. Sometimes I'm moving so fast. If anything, just let me know, and then I could just slow down as we go along. In addition to that, if you have some questions, right? So we have the Q&A, and then we have the chat session. Okay, so you can put your questions in there. Now, the thing is that I'll actually be focused on the screen that I'll be presenting from, which is ahead of me. So I may not necessarily have an overview of the chat and then the Q&A session, but I would, how do you call it? I would get to them as and when time goes on or as we go along. So just take note of that. And then one final thing. Yes, so one final thing. So for those of us who join in as I try to just make sure that what your mic is unmuted, so that at some point, maybe if you need to interject me, I'll prefer you don't interject while I'm actually going along with that. But you could just, if you feel there's something critical you want to clarify on, you could just go ahead with that. If it's not so critical, you can use the chat or you can use the Q&A session. Okay, so that's with the Q&A, how do you call it, the housekeeping part. So I think with that said, we could go ahead. And I see that a lot of you were able to comment in the chat. That's good. So we could just go ahead. So with the introduction, right? I know this image is actually not so clear, but the main focus that I'm actually looking at is in terms of the values here. So you see 4 PV, you see 500 million, you see 3.9 billion, you see 4 terabytes, you see 4.4 zettabytes here. We see 28 to the data which will be created by 2025. Okay, so that's the amount of data which will be created in 2025. And then if you see with the 4 petabyte, that talks about Facebook. Okay, so you have about 4 petabytes of data being created on Facebook. Now, we'll actually see why that becomes important and then necessary as we go along. But now, 4 petabytes of data, what does that mean, or how does that relate to anything? Now, if you have 1 petabyte of data, now, if you look at the zeros here, we have about, okay, so you have some aspect of that data, okay, you'd have to know how you go about that, okay. Now, let's go ahead, and then we want to look at a few concepts, okay, which will touch into what we are talking about. Now, with the resources that I shared, okay, they go in depth as to these particular concepts that we are going to watch the videos from before. With the Python aspects, you can watch also the previous sessions. You can look out for the real Python. You can look out for the Python crash course. All of these are aspects that you could also look at. So let's start off, and then let's look at data scraping. Okay. Now, what's data scraping? Now, I've highlighted some aspects of that, and that's what we'll actually be looking at. So the initial aspect, okay, that we'll look at is in terms of you retrieving some amount of data. Okay. Now, when you are retrieving that data, it means that that data is actually an output, or it's actually produced by another service or program. Okay. So let's say you fill out a questionnaire, for example, and then there are some details that are provided within that questionnaire. Now, with your output, okay, or if you are scraping that data, it means that you are trying to now get some bit of information from that questionnaire that was answered, okay. And if you come to the computer term, that means that, let's say, I was talking about the main concepts, okay. So let me just step back a bit. So the main concept that we'll be talking about, right? So if you want to harness Python, right, and then we want to harness Lambda for our sessions, or let's say scraping data, right? What are some of the concepts that would come to mind? I mean, under discussion of this particular topic. So the very first one that we talked about is in terms of data scraping, right? So what's data scraping? That means that you are now picking some bit of information from another application, okay? And I gave an example of, let's say you have a questionnaire of some sorts, and then based on that questionnaire, you want to gather some data from that. Now, picking out that data, that becomes a form of scrapping, okay? Like you scrapping some form of data from that. And our main focus, as we talked about, or as I mentioned, is in terms of web scraping, okay? So we are scraping data from a website, okay, or a web page, or a web document, okay? That's the concept. So you could have that web page on your machine. We'll see that as we go along with the demo, or you could have that on another website altogether. Okay, so that's for that. Now, all right. So that's for the data scraping, and I hope that's very clear to all of us as well. All right. So let's proceed now. Another concept, okay, that I wanted to talk about. So once we talk about web scraping, right, the focus comes to HTML, which is hypertext markup language. Okay, so for every website you see on the internet, now it doesn't matter if the backend was built with Django, or you have some PHP or Ruby on Rails. Now, the underlying aspect which is presented to you on the browser, okay, has a component of the hypertext markup language being available in there. Okay, so that becomes the standard for creating web pages. So a web page or a web document, that becomes something that you actually have in there. Now, aside that, okay, when you are scraping data from the website or a website, you now have to consider the structure of the HTML or the HTML page. So whichever website it is, if it's, let's say Facebook, if it's, let's say Google or YouTube, right? These are all aspects that you need to have when you are scraping data. So the basic HTML structure, and would actually get to see some bit of that, not the full structure, because you can't necessarily have the full structure, but we'll get to see a sample of that. So let's just review that, okay? Let me do this. So I would actually show instead, let me just get a simple. So I would actually show the google.com, the website, google.com. We are all conversant with that. Let me just increase the view here a bit. All right. Okay, so we see this, right? This is actually a web page. I hope you can all see the Google screen. You can put a 2 in the chat if you can see that. If you can see the Google web page, you can just put a 2 in the chat so that I know that you can see that. All right, thank you. Thank you for doing this with me. All right, so if I come here, if I right click on that, right, and I click on inspect, okay. Now, if I click on inspect, I think I'll still have to zoom in a bit on this, okay. Now, if I click on inspect on this side of the, okay, let's view the page source instead. I think that will be much helpful at some point. Not structured, but much helpful. Okay, let's view the page source. Then we'll come back to the inspect element. So let's have that load. Okay, so this looks a bit scary. I think let's still go back with the inspect. Okay, I think that'll probably better the DOM, the HTML DOM, the document object model. Okay, how do I increase this? Yeah. Okay, right. I hope you can all see the right side. Okay, so we have HTML there. Okay, we have body, we have head, we have different components there. So we have div and all of that. Now, I mean, in one of my previous sessions, there was one session that was streamed yesterday that actually showed us now being able to change this button here, that's a Google search, okay, into something that we are conversant with. Okay, so that becomes that. So let's see if you can do something like that, just to get us going. Let's see, how do I select that? All right, yeah. Okay, so you can see Google search here. Okay, so I could change the text, and then okay, I think okay. Wow. So I changed that, but it did not show. Let's see. All right, but I mean, that's not our focus for today, but I'm just showing on that. Don't worry so much about that. But this actually gives us an overview of how the HTML actually gets to be. Okay, now let's see if I actually delete a component, okay, of this. So if I delete that, you see that it actually affects the page. If I delete another component, let's see here with the body, okay. So this actually highlights the body. Now, if I delete that, you realize that I actually get a blank page, okay? But this actually is what we are talking about with the DOM, the document object module, DOM module, yeah. So the document object module, okay? So with that, that's what we are actually focusing on at the moment. So typically for any website that you are working on, you start with the HTML tag, okay? The HTML tag becomes the primary aspect where you start from. So you start with the HTML tag, then you now come down to, how do you call it? You now come down to either the body, okay, you start with the head and then the body, okay? It's just like the human body. So you have your head where, let's say, you can have your cognitive functions in there, okay? And then you have a number of your senses in the place there as well. Then you come to the body where actually from the head, you can now go ahead to control some components of your body, okay? So we see that here with the HTML, right? And then you come to what? The head and then the body. Now, under the head, you have what? You can have your title, okay, your title tag, you can have your script tag, and then you can have your style tag. Now, if you come to the body, you can have different tags forming a part of the body, okay? These are just like a segment of that. Now, still breaking down with the div, for example, you can have, let's say, some sections, okay? So within a website, you have a section that you're actually working from or you are working at. You have that. and then you can have a header for that section, and then you could have, let's say, a table. Now, I've actually added a table because I want us to focus on extracting data from a table. So all the data that we'll be extracting today, let's say one from Wikipedia, another from a custom website that I actually created, just a sample, a dummy site. Okay, so all of that will be focusing on the table. Now, within the table, there are also some tags in there that you have to take note of. Okay, now you have the table head, you have the table data. All right, now as we go along within our slides and then our presentation, we'll actually get to understand why this becomes very necessary, because once you are scraping the data, you don't necessarily need to scrape the entire data. So let's say you want to scrape data within a table, right? You want to scrape data within a table, then it means that you can now go ahead and then target the table. Now, if you are targeting the table, where does it sit under? Does it sit under the head or under the body? Okay, so it's under the body. Now, if it sits within the body, now, does it sit within a div or a paragraph? Okay, these are all components that you'd have to now take note of, all right? Now, that's why I mentioned that you having, let's say, foreknowledge of some bit of HTML would actually be helpful, okay? But don't worry so much about that. This session is just to give us an overview of these things. So later on, you could actually go ahead to review that as well, and then it would actually get to make some more sense or provide more understanding for you as you go along. All right. So another thing we'll look at is Python. Okay, now Python is a programming language. Aside Python as a programming language, we have other programming languages. So you have PHP, you have Ruby, you have Golang, you have different ones. Okay, now all of these programming languages actually help you to create whatever program that you are doing. So it's a programming language, and it helps you to create whatever program you are working on. Okay, and that could be in different aspects. Okay, so you could actually be doing some bit of web development, you could be doing some bit of machine learning, you could be doing some bit of web scraping. All of these are things that are possible. And the good thing with Python is that it's a general purpose language, in the sense that what, for any system at all, you can actually be able to go ahead and then use Python for that. Now, not only that, but in addition to you being able to use Python on different systems, the good thing is that you can use it for web development. If you are doing machine learning, that's also something you can use it for. If you are doing data science, you could also use that. If you are doing, I mean, literally everything that you want to do, let's say even game development, that's something you could have with Python. Now, what are the benefits? So it's free and then open source. Okay, so you don't have to pay anything when you are using Python. And I think literally most programming languages, you don't have to pay anything to use them anyway. And another thing with Python is that it's very easy to learn. Now, if you go through the Python crash course, okay, you find out how easy it is to actually get started with Python. Another thing is that it actually is a popular programming language. So you have lots of people actually using Python, okay, and then you have a large community. Now, with the community, what you get from that is that when you are stuck with something or you need help with something, it's easier to have people who are also maybe have used Python for that same project that you've had or used over the period, and then they can help you with that. And then another thing is that it's versatile. Now, we talked about that. So you can use it for multiple things. So not just web development, not just web scraping, not just data science, but you can use it for multiple things as well. And then aside that, it supports multiple programming paradigms. Now, for anyone who is a programmer, you realize that there are different paradigms that you actually get to use. Let's say you are doing object-oriented programming language, you are doing, let's say, functional programming. Okay, all of these paradigms are actually supported by Python, and then you could actually go ahead and then you use that as well. Now, let's go on to our next concept, which is the Python modules. Okay, now we'll be using a number of modules within our demo, or let's say scraping the data. Now, what's a module in Python? Now, a module in Python is more like, you could call that, let's say, a plugin or an extension. And what it allows you to do is what? It provides you with what? Sets of tools that you can use for different purposes. Now, the very first example we have here is Beautiful Soup, okay, which is used for scraping data. Okay, that's the main, let's say, module that we'll be using within our Python environment. Now, in addition to that, you could have CSV, okay, with some of the demos I'll be doing, right? I'll actually write the data to a CSV file. And this particular module ensures that once I scrape the data, I could write that to a CSV file, okay? Now, aside that, you can have JSON module as well. We'll not use that on the local. I'm doing two demos, okay? One with the AWS environment, where we use the Python, the Lambda functions. And then the second one is on our local environment. So on our local environment, you might not necessarily use the JSON in there, okay? But just take note of that. All right, so these are the modules that we are talking about. So BS4, that's a beautiful soup. And then we have the CSV, we have JSON. Now, aside these, there are different modules also that you can use. And let me see if I can just share that site. So there's a site that has multiple modules that are available. Let me see. I don't know if I got that right. It's been a while. I looked at that. But on that particular site, they have different modules. Yeah, okay. So the Python package index, okay, so you can just check that out, PyPI, and then you have different projects that you can look at. Let me see. So if I look for beautiful soup, right, you see that I could actually get to see some bit of information for them. Let me just zoom in a bit. So there are different projects. So you have to identify the particular one that you want to work with. Okay, so these are all available for you as you go along. Okay, so let's see. Let me just see if I could find some other modules. So there's this module named Pygame, okay, which actually can be used for developing games, right? So you see that here. So we have Python game development, okay, which is available to you. And okay, Pygame 2048. Okay, this is actually one of the games I like, 2048. It's very interesting. Yeah, so you have these modules available, and then you can work with them based on your needs. Okay, so you have a large volume of listing of Py modules here, and then you can just go ahead, install that, and then you are good to go as you go ahead with your Python development. All right, at this point, does anyone have any question? We'd want to dive into some other concepts. So if anyone has a question, you can just feel free and then share that as well. So I see Mohammed Zak, your hand is up. Do you have a question? Mohammed Zak, if you have a question, you can go ahead and then ask. All right. Anyone else? Maybe if you have a question, you can put that on the chat. Let me see the Q&A. Okay, there's no question on the Q&A as well. But don't forget, if you have any questions, just feel free and then you ask those ones as well. In the case there's no question, I'll just go ahead and then we'll talk about this. I'm not going to dive so much into that. I think with the sessions earlier in the morning on compute service. So I forgot the name of the person who held the session, but he actually went ahead to talk about some bits of what you talk about when it comes to cloud computing. So I'm not going to so much dive into that, but let me just start briefly on that. So if you have your computer, so for all of us, right, we have our computer system, and based on our computer system, we can actually maybe host our website or anything like that. Now, when it comes to cloud computing, it means that there's a computer or a server sitting somewhere else, and you don't have that readily available to you. But you can now go ahead and then connect into that, okay? Now, based on your connection, you can have access to multiple IT resources, okay? So all of these IT resources are available to you. So these resources will probably be based off the internet, okay? So you can have, let's say, some compute power for some processes you are running or some computations you are running, or you could have some form of storage, okay? Now, we are used to cloud storage, which is very common for most people, or you could have some form of networking services which are available to you, where you are connecting, let's say, some of your IoT devices and all of that, okay? So these are all things that are available. So you can have, let's say, processing power, the compute power, you can have storage, you can have databases, okay? And all of these are actually provided over the internet. So you don't have to buy, let's say, a server rack or something, but you can just be able to access that server rack over the internet. That's the general concept when it comes to cloud computing, okay? And I mean, I'm not really diving deep into that as I mentioned, but you could look at the resources that are available that I shared in the chat. I think we still have that resource in the chat. You could just check on that, and then you could go over that. Now, one of the major providers of cloud services is AWS. And one of the major providers is AWS, okay? And then they have quite a number of services, okay? Now, I mentioned in terms of compute, I mentioned in terms of network, but they have services that span across different aspects. Now, when I start with the Lambda, the demo with the Lambda, I'll try and then show you a number of those services. But you could have as much as 200 services, okay, from IoT, from satellites to, I mean, there are quite a number of those, okay, which are available. And that's something that AWS actually gets to provide. Now, AWS has customers ranging from startups, enterprises, government agencies, and all of that. And what they do is that based on their services, right, you are able to now have these services at a lower cost because what? A lot of people are using that at the same time. And then you now become more agile when you are developing or deploying your applications. Okay, so that's one thing which is available to you. And then you are also able to innovate at a faster rate. Okay, so these are some of the things that you actually get to have as you go along. All right. Okay, now with the concepts, right? We are still going on with the concepts. Okay, these become very important. I mean, as we jump into the Lambda side of things. But when we talk about compute services, right? You can think of your computer. So if you have your computer, what are the things that you have on there? Okay, that's like the basic understanding that you have. Okay, now when it comes to the AWS setting, okay, you have different compute services. So you have the EC2. Okay, now this becomes more like a virtual machine that you are working with. All right, and then in addition to that, you have Elastic Beanstalk. So you have a web application. You want to run that within the second. Okay, and then you don't want to worry about, let's say, setting up underlying servers or something. These are all possible with the Beanstalk. And then AWS has a number of container services. Okay, now you could have EKS, ECS, ECR, ECS. I mean, there are quite a number of them. And I'm not going to these are just short forms of that. EKS, that's Elastic Kubernetes Service. ECS, Elastic Container Service. ECR, Elastic Container Registry, and then Fargate. Now, I know that just mentioning them might get you a bit confused, but what these actually do, or the main focus of containers, okay, or you working with containers, is that you have a miniature form of your application. It's like you just go ahead, build that on one system, and then you can run that on a different system. And the EKS, for example, that's the Kubernetes, that allows you to run multiple of these container services at the same time. The ECS, let's say you're just running a single. Sometimes you can even run multiple services in there, but these are all things in there. So once you are running these applications, right, or this infrastructure, you have these services which help you to manage that. And then one final thing, which we'll actually be focusing on, or which our demo will be on, is the AWS Lambda. Okay, so it's a serverless event-driven compute service. Okay, so serverless, I mean, when I was in school, there was this, how do you call it, suffixes. When we talk about suffixes, we have less, we have different ones. Now, I remember they say less means without. Okay, so if you think about serverless, and then you actually have serverless, right? So it means that less means without, that means that without a server. Okay, now that's correct in some sense, in the sense that you would actually not get to manage the server or the compute resources, but AWS gets to manage all of that for you, or whichever environment or whichever serverless platform you are using. Okay, so that's the concept of that. So you have your compute service, but you don't have to now manage, let's say, in terms of the size, in terms of the RAM and all of that. And another thing is the event-driven side of things. Now, when we say event-driven, so based on, let's say, a need. So let's say I want to, when you want to do some form of calculation, let's say you are going to buy something, you have to do a quick calculation. You pick out your calculator, you type in 5 times 4. Okay, that's the only time you'd actually get to type or use the calculator. Now, after that, you actually now turn off the calculator, or you just put it somewhere, then you are done with that. Now, there are some applications that would actually run in the same way. So you just run that at a particular time based on something that has happened. So let's say you are working with an IoT device, for example, and the IoT is maybe based in your fridge. Now, if it's based in your fridge, you want to send a notification. Let's say you have some eggs, a dozen eggs in your fridge, and then you want to send a notification, right? Now, that notification will be sent when a particular event happens, which is, let's say, the eggs in your fridge are left with 2, or you have just 2 eggs in your fridge. That becomes that event, right? So within that moment, right, you can now process that event on whatever compute instance, let's say for Lambda, for example, and then you can work from there. So that event, and then that passes that to Lambda. There's some form of computation that's done within the underlying infrastructure, and then you can go from there. All right. So that's for that's just for that. Okay, in terms of Lambda. But I want us to just still look at Lambda into detail. Okay. Now, when we talk about Lambda, okay, so you run your code without provisioning any infrastructure. So you don't have to get a VM. Okay, so we saw here with the EC2, the beanstalk, the container services, you probably have to manage some aspects of the server. Maybe with beanstalk, you might not do that, but let's say with the EC2 and then the container services, that's something that you do. So you have to now go ahead and then run those, okay? But when you come to Lambda, you don't have to run all of that. What you do is that you write your code, you actually now upload that particular code, maybe you zip that or a container image, and then Lambda is able to run that for you. Another thing is that you actually respond to automatically, right? It's able to respond to executions, okay? So still with the event-driven something. So you can make a request, and then it's able to respond to that. So let's say you upload an image, you want to resize that. So it's able to determine that, okay, you've uploaded an image within your service. And once that upload is done, it's able to what? Execute some code and then to respond to that. And then it's also able to scale, okay, as and when needed. So you can have, let's say, just a few handful of requests, or you can have multiple requests per second, okay? These are all options that you have when it comes to Lambda. Now, you also get to save cost. So when you're actually running, let's say within a Lambda, for example, what you are doing is that you are just using that compute service for, let's say, a number of seconds. Now, Lambda has a number of minutes that you can run your code for, okay, or your code can be executed, okay. That's something that's available to you. So based on that, it means that if your code runs for 2 minutes or 1 minute, it means that you actually get to pay for that second, okay. You actually get to pay for that number of seconds that you are using the service. You are not paying for the storage, for example. You are not paying for the underlying components. All of these are based off what? The number of seconds or the number of minutes that you are going to use the service, okay? So that's just one thing that you actually have to take note of. And the final thing, so you can actually go ahead to optimize your code based on your memory size. So let's say your code requires a specific memory size. All of these are available for you when you are using the Lambda environment. All right, still going on, okay, what are some of the features of Lambda? Okay, so you can have your custom logic, okay? Now, custom logic in the sense that, let's say you want to incorporate some different services. So within the AWS environment, you can actually go ahead to do that. Now, with my demo, I was actually intending to incorporate that with the S3, but I did not get around to doing that, okay? Maybe some other time, I'll maybe write a follow-up article, okay, how you can probably incorporate that into the Lambda function, okay? But that's one thing you have. So you can have a custom logic, and then you can incorporate that to different services within AWS as well. And then you can use that for, let's say, a backend service. So Lambda as a compute service, you can have that as your backend service. So let's say you have a static website, and you want to process some orders, right? Now, you have your static website being made available. You don't have to necessarily host that on a virtual environment, for example, because let's say your application, okay, or your backend service does not run all the time. Okay, so let's say a user make a request, then you can pass that request to Lambda. Lambda does the processing of that within that short period of time. Let's say within that milliseconds, or let's say a second that it does the processing, and then that's that for you. In the end, you actually get to pay for that, as compared to, let's say, you having a running server, okay, which is running like over a period of time. Okay, so that's one thing. Now, in addition to that, there are no frameworks or languages that you have to do when you are working with Lambda. Okay, so let's say you have a code running, so you will see that you can now modify that to suit the Lambda environment, and then you are good to go. Okay, you don't have to now get a new language or something. That's one advantage or one feature as well. And then it has built-in fault tolerance. Okay, so you put your code in there, it's able to have some level of fault tolerance available for you, and then you can work along those lines as well. Now, in addition to that, you actually pay for the time that your server runs. Okay, so that your application runs or your code runs. So if you are using it for 1 second, that is what you actually get to pay for. Okay, so that's one thing that you should take note of. And then Lambda scales up automatically. We talked about that in the previous aspects. Okay, so it can scale automatically based on what your code might require. All right, and then you can actually deploy packages. Okay, and you can also deploy whatever function as a container image. So whatever function you are working with within the Lambda environment, you could actually go ahead and then move that to your container service. Let's say your ECS, for example, or your EKS. These are all options which are available. And please don't get alarmed with the number of the concepts that I mentioned. Okay, these are how do you call it, related to the AWS environment. Okay, so these are things that you might actually get to see. All right, but you don't have to worry your head that you don't understand them in one way or the other. Now, the last aspect of the feature is that you actually get to focus on the code that you want to work with. So that becomes your focus. You don't worry about all other things. Your focus is your code, and then the Lambda environment is able to now go ahead and then make that work for you. So these are some of the features when it comes to the Lambda. Now, in terms of use cases, okay, within your web application, you can have that there. So these are all AWS, how do you call it, services. So you have an S3 for storage, okay? And then once there is some bit of information there, or the user clicks from there, right? Based on that request that you are making, we can now pass that information to Lambda, and then Lambda can actually go ahead to store that within a database for us, okay? So let's say this is actually a weather, how do you call it? A weather-based application, okay? So if we want to check the weather, the user clicks on some aspects of that because that particular application is hosted on the S3 bucket, for example, okay? Then we can go ahead, once the user clicks on that, we make a request to the Lambda. Now, you remember me talking about, let's say, using Lambda as your backend service. So let's say the user clicks on that. Okay, tomorrow, how would the weather look like, right? A request is placed to Lambda. Lambda processes that information. Maybe it makes a query to another website or makes a query to a particular database. And then you can have that going. So you see that here, it actually makes a request to a DynamoDB, okay? And then you are able to go from that. Now, aside that, you could also have some bit of file processing. I talked about some examples. So you upload an image, and then based on the image that you've uploaded, it's able to resize that image for you. Now, you can have different options. So let's say you add an input to a particular file, and then based on that input that you've added, it's now able to update some other information. Or let's say there's some bit of services that you are using, and that services go overboard. You can now use Lambda to respond to all of these things, and then you process that. Now, aside that, you could have, let's say for your mobile application, right? So Lambda can serve as what? The backend for that, okay? That's also possible. And then finally, if you are working with an IoT device, for example, you could have Lambda make that happen, okay? So we see here there's some form of a tractor. there are some sensors on the tractor. Now, based on the sensors on the tractor, we are now able to stream that data into the AWS information. Okay, so whatever information, we stream that, and then Lambda is now based on our sensors, right? Picking that information, we stream that through Kinesis. It passes on to the AWS Lambda, and then whatever information we need to have, we also get that. Okay, so that's for the backend, and then there are different applications. I mean, people who might be doing some bit of things to do with IoT development. Okay, this becomes very much of helpful as you go along. And then the last thing is the stream processing. Okay, so you actually have some stream data streaming in. Lambda can actually go ahead and then run some form of permutations or commutations over that data, and then you have that available to you as well. All right, so that brings to the end of the slides, okay? And I want us to jump into the demo, all right? But before we do that, does anyone have a question? I mean, based on what I've talked about, Lambda in terms of Python, in terms of HTML, if anyone has any question, now is the time. You can go ahead and then ask. So you can put that in the Q&A, you can put that in the chat, or you can raise your hand. I'll just go ahead and then allow you to ask your question as well. Okay, so any questions from anyone? Okay, all right. So there's actually no question from anyone, I believe, or there isn't. All right, good. Okay, all right. All right, so there's a question in the Q&A session, and okay, I'll take that. But before that, Emmanuel, so you can go ahead with your question. Yes.
Oh, okay. So connecting with the Python, how would the backend be? The AWS with the Python, how would they be like? I didn't get that side.
Okay, sure. So with the backend, what I was talking about is that, so you realize that the Lambda service is event driven. Okay, so let's say if an event happens, right? Lambda, you can use Lambda to respond to that. So let me just go back here with what we had with the back end. Our mouse pointer is missing. All right, so what we had with the web application. What is that? Okay, yes, so what we have with the web application, right? Now, based on the user clicking a particular part of the website, or let's say maybe a call to action button on the website, I mean, or maybe any link, right? You are now able to process that. Now, we see here something we call the API gateway, okay? Now, API gateway, Amazon API gateway actually helps you to make what? API requests, okay? Now, based on that API request, we can now pass that request to the Lambda. Now, once the Lambda gets that, okay, now, as part of our backend, so we could have different forms of backend, right? But let's say as part of our backend logic, what we want to do is that we want to now go ahead and then store some bit of information or retrieve some bit of information from a database that we are working with. Okay, now with retrieving that information, it's not something that goes on perpetually. Okay, it's something that, okay, we'll now read from the database at one point in time. Okay, so it means that once the Lambda gets that information based on the request, right, it's now able to process that, read that information from the database, and then grant a response which the user can see or which the user can work for. Okay, so that's for the backend logic. And you can have, I mean, based on your needs, you can have different logic in there, or maybe different approaches for the logic that you have in there. All right. I hope that answers your question, Danso.
Yeah, so does it use the post or the get method to do that?
Yes, so the post or the get in this regard would actually be something that the API gateway would actually take care of. Okay, so based on your need, right, you can have a post request. You could have, let's say, a get request as well. You could have, let's say, a put, a delete. I mean, based on your need, you can have that. That's what the API gateway will do. The only thing is that it will now trigger the Lambda, okay, to now perform some specific function for you as and when needed. All right?
Okay, sure. Thanks.
All right. And I think you could check out the Lambda page, okay, and then read more on that. That would also be very helpful as you go along, okay. You'd find that very interesting when you're developing your applications as well, okay. All right. So Shadrach has a question in the chat, okay, and he's asking about is Lambda limited to a number of calls, okay. Now, the limitation that Lambda has some form of execution. So in terms of the files that you're executing, right, it has a particular size of let's say code that you can execute, okay, or let's say available to you. Now, aside that, you also have, let's say, a number of seconds or minutes that you can run, okay. So these are the limitations that are available, okay. So in terms of the number of minutes that that particular backend can run, okay. So it's not, let's say, something that you'll be running for 4 hours. So just a few minutes, let's say some 2 minutes or 1 minute, you are done with that and then you are good to go. But you can't run, let's say, how do you call it? A request that would probably be 1 hour or will take 1 hour to process, okay. So that's one of the things. And then in terms of the size, okay, so if you have a larger file size, ideally what most people do is that they would actually go ahead and then put that within their S3 bucket. And then once you put that code within the S3 bucket, depending on the size, then you actually direct Lambda to pick the code from the bucket, and then it's able to run that for you. I hope that answers your question, Shadrach. Okay, great. All right. So if anyone else has a question, you can go ahead and then ask. I want us to now maybe start with the demos. So let me just prep my screen for that. So a quick one. So for this particular session, what I did was that I had the code written down. Okay, so I shared the link already. So I had the code written down already, and we'll just try and then understand a few things from the code that I have written down. All right. I hope you can see what's in the code or what's available here. I hope you can see that. You can put a 2 in the chat or a 3 in the chat if you can see that. All right. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll get the link for you. Where did I put that? Let me just find that. I think, yeah, some people joined later on, so they might not have seen that link. Okay. And I'll try and then see if I can zoom into the code as well. If not, if I don't know how we'll go from there, but we'll find our way around. Probably I'll just stop and then start the share on a different screen, and then we'll see how that looks like. Okay, so that lists out the resources and then the other aspects that we'd actually need as we go along. All right, so okay, so let me just close my VS Code and then open that. I think everything. Okay, let me do this. All right. So let's get started. Let me see if I can zoom in a bit. All right. All right. Great. Okay. Right. So this the primary code that we'll be looking at. And so there's two versions of that. So there's this, and then there's this. Now, the difference with these two is that with the first one, okay, I have an index.html file, okay. I mentioned that I had a custom site. I did not get time to update that properly, but I just had the sample there. So we'll just see all of this. So we have the table. Okay, let me just do this. So when I was talking about the document object model, right? We talked about the HTML, right? Now within the HTML, I have my head and then I have my body. Within the head, I have some bit of tags in there, which are pretty visible. And then within the body, right, I have my H1 tag here. I have my P tag, and then I have my table. Okay. Now the table is where we have the data showing. Let me see if I could show this. Okay, no worries. So within that is where we have the data, okay, which will now be extracted. Okay, so that's for this particular code. Okay, so that's where we actually get to access that. So we read from that file, and then we are now able to write from there. Now, aside that, we have this where we'd actually try to extract some bit of information from the mobile web Ghana page. Okay, so that's for the second one. All right. Now, let's get started. So the very first site, okay, that we see is in terms of the package. Now, I mentioned that we are using Beautiful Soup. Now, what Beautiful Soup will do is that it helps us to scrape that data of that. Okay. Now, I have aside the Beautiful Soup, I have import request. Now, I think someone was asking, yeah, the previous question, when we were talking about making requests to the Lambda, someone was asking whether we'll use a GET request, a POST request, or whichever one it is, right? Now, if you're working with Python and then you want to make some requests to some websites, right, you'd have to get this particular module, which will ensure that you're able to do that. Now, I could have that as a POST or a GET request, but in this case, I'm just getting that particular information. So it's not so much of a big deal, all right? So that becomes that. Now, aside the request that I import, okay, so on line 2, I import the request. On line 4, okay, I import the CSV. Now, okay, I think, yeah, we use the CSV here. And what the CSV does, okay, is that's what we actually use to create or open the CSV file where we would actually store that particular information. Okay, so that's available to us here as well. All right, so that's for the CSV. Now, with the website, in this case, you notice that I'm actually scraping for a website. So I need to provide that website, okay? And then that's where it would actually go ahead to scrape that data for us. Now, when we are done scraping the data, we'll now have to pass that information, okay, to a request, and then we now pass it to the Beautiful Soup. I know this might sound overly technical. It is pretty straightforward. I mean, if you understand working with Python and then the modules and all of that, but this code is actually made available. So if I wanted to change this website, okay, if I had another website, let's say, which website can I have? Okay, yeah. So I could have African Digital Skills Conference, right? So I could just go ahead and then type that here. And then once I type that there, okay, the good thing is that it actually means that once I'm actually now scraping the information from the website, I'll get information from African Digital Skills Conference. Okay, so you can actually put in any website that you want. Now, in addition to that, we have the, how do you call it? The page, right? So you get that particular website. So this becomes a placeholder. So I want to get information from this website. And then once I get that, I can now make the request. Once the request is made available, right? I could now make sure that what I pass the information such that it becomes like, it comes in the form that I'm able to see. So let's say with the HTML form like this, the structure is now what spread out, and then we can now target the extra components in there. All right. Now, you notice here, now I was talking about the requirements. I made mention of working with JavaScript, for example, or CSS selectors. Now, this is where we see that. So here with line 13, I've literally, let's say, got access to the website. Okay. Now, let me see if I could do this. Let me just comment this side of things out. And then let me print out what we have with the soup. So if I do print soup, let's see what we are going to get. Okay, I'm in the right folder. All right. So let me just explain what I'm doing in case you might be wondering. Okay. So within my terminal, right? First thing I do, I just check the files and folders which are available. Now, when I started off, I was in a folder by name Python, right? Which will not work because my file is in a different folder, the data scraping with Python. So I have to make sure I get back there. It's almost like me working within my file manager, all right? So once I'm here, I just have to make sure that what I move back to the previous folder. So I do a CD and then I do a ... Okay, that sends me one step up. And when I do an ls, you can see that what the Python folder is also available here. So that means that what I sort of did a back or I went up the structure of the folder. Okay. Now the folder I'm looking for is the data script with Python. So I just do a CD and then I'm able to access that. So CD data script with Python, I have access to that. And then I have the files in here. Now, once I have the files in here, I can go ahead and then run the file. So the file we are using the scrape.py, okay, scrape.py. So I can go ahead and then run that. Now, I forgot to mention, okay, with all the modules that we are working with, okay, when you start or when you install your Python, okay, these are not available to you automatically, okay? So you have to install them. So if you are installing them, for example, I think I put them in the README file. I put them, yeah. So with this command, right, I'm able to install that. I mean, depending on the Python version that you are using. So if I had Python 3, for example, I could just go ahead Python 3-m, and then I do a pip3 install, and then the module name, which is the, let's say, the beautiful soup, okay? Now, once I do that, it's able to install that for me. Wait, let me just change that here. Make that, yeah, really. All right, so it tells me that there's no, give me a second. I think I missed something here. All right, the answer says PIP install. All right. So I mean, based on the system that you are using, okay. I'm using Linux at the moment, right? So the structure might be different. But as Anso said, if you go with the PIP install in some versions, okay, you'll have that automatically done for you. If you're in a Windows environment, so when I was doing the test run on my Windows environment, I had to make sure that what you specify in terms of the Python 3 before you go ahead, do the -m, and then the PIP install. Okay, so if you're on a Linux environment, it becomes pretty simple to go with that as well. Okay, so just take note of that. So back to where we are. So with all these modules that we had available here that we are importing, okay, before we start off, you have to make sure that you install them. So the BS4, CSV, whichever module, you have to install them. I've already installed them, so I don't have to worry my head about it. So I could just go ahead and then run the file. So we actually want to see the script, okay? So Python script.python. See what it's telling me. All right, let me do Python 3. Yeah. Okay, so there are actually a number of errors in there. Let me see if they can tell us what the error is. Okay, something to do with the request. Yeah. Let me see here. Okay. So I get it. So the website that we use, right? It's because of the website that we use. That's why it's actually doing that. So let's see if we have. I think the website is not correct. I typed in the wrong website. So let's try with google.com and then let's see what we get there. I think they might block it though, because Google is mostly not interested in people using their website. Okay, it actually brought out something, right? So I hope you can all see this. You remember when we did the inspect element, we saw something like this. When we did a view page source, we saw something like this, and then these are all aspects of that. So it means that within our soup, right, we have all of this. But what we want to go ahead and do is that we now want to go ahead. Oh, wait, let me just undo everything here. I need the website for the, yeah, I need it here. All right, so what we want to do is that we want to be able to access this Wikipedia site. And then once we get that from the soup, right, we now have to target the table, okay? Now, within the index file, I showed you that we have the table, right? Within the table, right? We have the table head. Where is that? We have the table head, and then we have the table body, right? So I need to target which side of things am I going for? Am I going for the content within the table head or within the body? So I target within the soup, the table. I target also the table body, okay, which is there. And then I'm now able to get the content from that. Now let's see if we can print out the table and then see what exactly it shows us, okay? That will be very helpful. Okay. Okay, I did not save that, so it's not going to. Okay, it actually did. It actually did. But not what I'm looking for anyway. All right. So within that, right, this is what it actually picks for me. So it picks the entirety of the page. So it adds the table row, right? And then the table head, all of these details are there. But these are things that I don't need to have or I don't need. So I would have to further refine it such that it picks out just the details that I need from there. So the details that I need are supposed to actually be something like this, okay? So where we have the abbreviation, so founders, okay, let me just open the site and then we'll see how that looks like. So that's fine. Okay, yes, here. So this is actually a website that we're actually extracting the data from. Okay. Now you see that there's quite a number of data here, but our main focus, let me inspect the element here. Our main focus is towards this side, which is this form of a table that we have here. Okay. So we have the abbreviation, we have the founders, we have the type, NGO, and all of these things. This is the information that we are focusing on. We are not focusing on this side of things, okay? Now, let's see if we can find correspondence to that. Okay, so that would be, wait, not enough. Okay, I was trying to find specifically towards that, but no worries. So our main focus, there's the data we are extracting is the data that is stored within this form of a table. Okay, so this is what we are actually trying to extract within our code. Okay, all right. So now you notice here that wait, let's see. Let me just run that again. All right, you notice here that what? There are quite a number of table rows which are available, okay? So we now have to what? Pick them all out, okay? So this gets pretty tricky, but we actually have to what? Now run a loop through that, okay? A for loop, and then for each of the information. So this information from the table is actually stored, you know, as, how do you call it? As a form of a list, right? So we have to now move through the list and then make sure that what we are able to extract the details or the values that we need. Okay. So I set for the heading and then the value. Okay. Now within the heading, you notice that let's see if you can find that here. Yeah, you notice that what? There's the abbreviation, and we get the value in there. There's a found all right. So I think for the most part, we saw with the heading, we saw with the value, okay, and then how it actually goes to be. Now, this here in particular, line 32 and then 33, the focus was to get the values in question that we are actually now extracting from the website, from Wikipedia. Okay, so that's the main focus in them. Now, when we come to line 35, the final thing I did was that with all the information that's extracted, okay, now for this side, okay, within the loop, okay, at any time we run the loop, okay, or any instance of the loop, what we do is that we write that particular detail, okay, to the file, okay, so we write that to the file. And here on 20, right, this actually allows us to what? To write to the file. So we open that initially, and then we have an initial row that we have, which is the name and then the link, okay? All right, so that actually now goes ahead to create that for us. Now, if you look here on the right side, you see there's a file here, that's the MWG data. Let me just delete that. And then I'll run the command again for us to see. So I still run Python 3, I do script.py. And then just take note here. You see that what? The file is generated again for me. Okay. So that's what happens. Okay. Now, if I was supposed to, if I run the second one, which is the, how do you call it? If I run for the second type or the second form, the second file, which is the S24, no, script, oh no, the S2.py, sorry, S2.py, you notice that another file will also be created, okay, ADSCV data, okay, so that's that. All right, so that's for the script.py. I don't know if anyone has any questions based off that. Does anyone have any question? And welcome to those of you who just joined. Okay, so I made mention that I would have a follow-up session. I mean, since we had a bit of a challenge, I'll just round up for here, and then we'll have a follow-up session that's subsequently. Okay, so does anyone have any question? I mean, based off or based on whatever we've talked about, does anyone have any question with the code? I mean, you might not understand the code, but maybe if you had some questions in there, it's totally fine. You could go ahead and then ask those ones as well. Oh, wait. Yeah, so the chat is open. You can go ahead. If you have any questions, you can put that there. If not, let's briefly look at the second file. Okay. The second file actually is working on the same principle as the first one that we have. Now, if you look here, okay, with what we have here with the request, you notice that what? It's not as deep as the other one. It's not as deep as the beautiful soup. and then it's not as deep as the CSV file itself. Okay, it's a bit lighter. This actually tells us that what within the context of this file, we don't actually get to use the request module. Okay, now with the very first module, we actually get to use that when we on line 10 here, okay, when we get the file. But here with this second file, what we do is that we just open an existing file on our system, which is the index.html file, which I had shown you earlier. We open that from within our system, and that is where literally all the action that we are working from is that. And then we still have literally the same form of information. So we have the CSV, okay, so we create a file, okay, and then we write to that file. And then we create an initial header, and then we proceed from there. Now, once we pick the data from all of that, right? I mean, based on this, so I'll say that based on the site, right, you'd have a different approach to how you go about that. So let's see. You notice here, when I was finding the extra rows, right, I use a different approach for that. So I use a find all because I actually structured the website myself. So I just made it as simple as possible so that I don't have to now find my way around things. Okay, so that's one thing. So I just find the table rows. So let's see if you can see that here. So by table body, you notice that what within the table body, right? There are multiple table rows here. Okay, so I literally find them, and then once those particular details are extracted, right, then I could go ahead and then how do you call it? Print out the table data within that. So each of them will have their own table data, and then you can work from there as well. Let me just print out. Let's see. Okay, let me just print out the row here, and then we'll see what we find from there. So within each row, what's the focus of the row? Okay, so if I go ahead to type print, and then I do a row. Okay. Oh, I didn't save that. Sorry. So if I do that again, you notice that what? It prints out all of these things for me. Okay, so each of the rows is printed out for me here. Okay, I could specify that. Wait, I'm not sure this is going to work. I don't know if it saved that with the index. Yeah, it's not going to work. So if we had saved it as an index, then we could have been able to print that, but no worries about that yet. So within the rows, we actually go ahead to what? To select the table data, and that is what we assign as we go along as well. Okay, so this is how it gets or how it looks like when you are working with the Beautiful Soup to scrape data from the internet. Okay, so that's just about that. Okay, so at this point, does anyone have any question? Does anyone have any question? Yes. So there's a question here which is very interesting from Shadrach. So Shadrach asks that, can websites block you from scraping data? Yes, websites can block you from scraping data. So I think recently you'd noticed that with how do you call it? Twitter, for example, there were some instances where the Twitter CEO was talking about them throttling some of the data so that you can't be able to access that because a lot of bots were now scraping their data. So yes, some websites can block you from actually scraping their data, especially let's say proprietary websites. They would actually be able to block you from doing that. Dan, so yes, you can go ahead with your question.
Yeah, on line 17, what is the function of the HTML.parser?
The HTML.parser. Okay, so the HTML.parser ensures that what within whatever how do you call it? Whatever information that we are picking out, okay, it passes that out to let's say to a form that's understandable by the HTML file. Because once we actually read the file from here initially, okay, once we read the file, it actually picks that out like just like that, okay. But you notice that with HTML is specific to tags, or HTML has some affinity to tags. So you passing it as an HTML file ensures that what the HTML aspect. So let's say within, let's say with the tags that you have, so with the head and all of those things, it's able to read them correctly. I don't know if you get that. So if I had an XML file, it means that I could now pass that as an XML here. And then that would be because XML has its own structure and then HTML has its own structure as well. I don't know if that answers your question, Dan. So
yeah, it's cool. It's cool. Yeah.
All right. Great. All right. If there's no question from anyone, I think we'll probably end here. Let's see. Okay. All right. So if there are no questions, right? Thank you for joining. So this is actually my LinkedIn. You could just connect linkedin.com/IN Emmanuel. And this is my Medium blog. I intend to actually write a follow-up blog on this particular session, okay? And so you could just bookmark this and then just check that out sometime. You could subscribe also so they are notified if that's put up. Now, I write primarily on AWS related stuff and then also in terms of security. Okay, so cloud security and then security in general. So you could always check that out. And let me find the link for the resources. So there are some resources. I think some of you may have missed that, but that could also be very helpful. I mean, when you now have to go over whatever we are doing in there, all right?